Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, we'll be learning how to cache API data locally inside our Flutter application. We'll be learning by building a simple news app that fetches API data, and we are going to cache that data locally inside our application. It will reduce the load time and also reduce excessive API requests that we send from our app. First, we'll be fetching an API from an endpoint, and after that, we'll be storing that API result inside our local database and display that data to the user. We don't want to store the old data for a long period of time, so for that, we'll be timely fetching the API and storing and updating the database so that we can show the latest result to the user. In this way, we will perform timely caching. So let's start. In this tutorial, we'll be using the Hacker News API. So search for Hacker News API and you'll get several links. Just select this link. It's hnalgolia.com. So visit this link and here you will get all the documentation like how you need to fetch the APIs. This API provides several endpoints. Like if we send a GET request to this endpoint, we need to specify our ID. So let us give one, and it will provide some news articles depending upon the ID. But we'll not use this endpoint. Instead, we'll be using this endpoint to get the latest stories. So just copy this endpoint and open it in a new tab. If we send a GET request to this endpoint, then so it will be containing up to 20 news results in each GET request that we send. So first, let us create a new Flutter application where we are going to fetch this API and display the result to the users. Open your terminal or command prompt and use Flutter, create, and type the name of your app that you are going to create. In our case, it will be cache API data in Flutter. Now our app has been created. Navigate to the folder where our app has been created and open it in VS Code. Now we'll start by removing the dummy code that comes inside our main.dart file. And here we'll be starting by creating a new folder. Name it as models, because here we are going to be specifying the models and how we are going to fetch the API. First, we need to create another folder, name it as views. Here we'll be keeping all the UI logic that we'll be using inside our application. Here first create a home.dart file. Here we'll be creating a stateful widget. Stateful because we are going to be refreshing this widget several number of times. For that reason, we are choosing stateful. Name the widget as homepage and remove this placeholder. We'll not be using a placeholder. Instead, we'll be using a scaffold. It will be the start of our application. And now you will find that this homepage does not exist. So we need to add the homepage that we have recently created. It will automatically import the package. We don't need to worry about that. Now let us start our emulator. Now our app is working. Now let us work on the model. You will not be needing the highlight result. We'll only be needing the auto created at the story ID for uniquely identifying the title and the URL. So let us make such model that can handle the API and only fetch the necessary data that we need. So here inside our models, first we'll be creating a file models.dart. Now inside, let us quickly create a class naming hacker news, and here let us specify the keys that we need. First will be the string author, string title, string URL, and rest will be using this story ID to uniquely identify. So it will be an integer. Let's make it as ID. And at last we'll be using the updated, and the updated at is in form of string. So let's use string updated at. Now here we need to initialize the constructor. So use hacker news, and here just initialize all the variables that we have declared. Now we need to convert the JSON that is coming from the API to our object model. For that, we'll be creating another function that will convert that JSON to the object. So for that, we need to write the factory. For that, we need to write the factory function. It will be hacker news. Let's name the function as from JSON. You will be expecting a map of string dynamic, and the value will be, you will be expecting a map that will have a key as string and value will be dynamic. Let's name it as JSON, and then we'll convert that to hacker news. ID will be inside JSON. It will be the story ID. Author will be inside author. JSON author. Title will be inside title. URL will be inside JSON URL. Updated that, just copy the correct key, otherwise it will create problems. Now we are done with it, but there may be some null values coming. So for that, we need to handle the null values. Let us do it here. If we don't get the story ID, in that case, we'll be using 0. And if we don't get the author name, then just an empty string. And this will happen for all of this. If we don't get the value, in that case, we'll be using an empty string. Now we have completed writing our model. Now what we are going to do, instead of showing the API results directly fetching from the API, and showing it to the user, we'll be saving the API result inside our local storage, and then we'll be showing the data to the user by reading the local storage. So this is how we are going to cache the data that is coming from the API, and then we'll store the data locally inside our database and then display the cache data to the user. So for this, first we'll be needing two packages. So for this to work, we'll be needing two packages. First package will be our HTTP package, this one, and our second package will be Sqflite. Sqflite. So it's a SQLite storage that we are going to use to cache our data that is coming from the API. Just add these two dependencies inside your application. Use Flutter for add HTTP and Sqflite. It will add the two dependencies. Now verify your pubsec.yaml file and check whether these two dependencies are added or not. In my case, these two dependencies are now added. Now let us write the API fetching logic first. Here we'll be creating a new folder. It will be controllers. First, let us write the logic to store the data inside our local database. Name it as local database.dart. Here inside this folder, we'll be creating a class named as local database. Here first we need to write the function that will create or open a new database. It will be a static function. Make it as future, and it will be a return type of database. This database is from Sqflite.dart. So you need to import this package before you are working on this. We need to create the function. Let's name it as create database. Make it async because this function will be needing some time to complete. Here we'll await, and first we need to open a database. So use the open database function that comes with Sqflite. Here we need to provide our path. Here we can simply give the name like hacker news.db. If we don't provide any path, it will choose the default path. Now we need to specify the version. It will be 1 for now, and it accepts several more arguments. We'll be using the onCreate argument, and we'll be providing that when we are opening this database, it will create a new table. So it's similar to the SQL that we use. So first we need to make this async because it will take some time again. Now here we will perform db.execute. Here we need to write our SQL queries. To create a SQL table, we use create table command. Here we'll name the table as news. So let's write raw SQL. It will be create table. Name of the table will be news. Here we need to provide the rows. First will be, since our application will only be needing this 5 we'll be only storing these 5 variables. So first will be our ID. It will be an integer. And it will also be a primary key. Then we'll have the title. It will be a type of text. For URL, let us use text. And for author, let us use varchar and provide the max length as 255. And the last will be updated at, and it will be a type of, let us store it in form of text. We can store it in form of datetime, but since everything is in text, so we don't need to do these changes. Just simply store it in form of text. So now what it will do, if we call this create database function, then it will open a new database and create a new table. Don't worry that if we call this function multiple times, then it will not create a multiple database already created, then it will not do anything. Here we need to write the function that will insert new news to the database. It will also be a static function and return type will be future. Let's call it as insert news. Here we need to provide the data like string. Here we can use the model that we have created, hacker news. Now here we need to provide the hacker news data. Make it async. And first we'll create a variable db and we'll call the create database. And with this we'll return and also wait db.insert. Here we need to give the name of the table. It was news. And here we need to specify the values as it's showing. So our values will be, first was our ID. ID was inside hacker news dot ID. Title. Instead just copy this tag, otherwise you might have some mismatch. Then we'll be having our URL. At last we'll be having the updated at. Now it is done, but here there might be same news getting added to the table multiple number of times. This might cause a crash. So to avoid that, what we are going to do, we are going to add a conflict algorithm. So if there is a conflict, please don't crash. Instead, just replace the database. Now we are done with our insert news function. Now it's our time to read the news. Read all the news from the local database. Make it static. Give return type as future. Here we'll be getting a list of here we'll be getting list of key values. So it will be string, comma, dynamic. Let's name it as get news. Make it async. Now, like our previous one, we need to create a db variable, and here we'll be getting a list of data. Await db.query. Need to provide the name of the table was news. Now if we use this, it will read all the news, but since we are only getting 20 news at a time, then we will also be showing 20 news to the user. For that, let's just limit it by 20, and also use, first we need to also be using an order by. Now we will use order by and set it to as descending depending upon the updated at. What it will do, it will order all the news in descending order depending upon the time updated is been saved inside the database. So instead of storing it in this, we can simply return it. So now we are querying over the news database and updating and ordering them by descending depending upon the updated time that we are getting from the API. If we want to get data after 20, what we are going to do? We are going to create another function, get more data, but in limit of 20. If our news has 50 or 60 data, then if we get 20, then we need to call this function to get the rest 20s, and then we need to call this function again to get the last 10. So here it will be read first 20 news from local database, read latest 20 news. It will be similar to this, just copy this and paste here, name it as get more news. Here we need to provide that from which position we need to start, int last number. Here it's simple, just one thing we need to do is set offset, and offset will be our last number. Now in this way we'll get more 20 news, and if it has more if it doesn't have 20 news, then it will fetch the amount of news that it has. Now it's okay. Let's write the logic to fetch the API now. It will be fetch API.dart. Let's create a class, hacker news API. It will be a type of future. Let's name it as get latest hacker news. What this will do, it will send a get request to the API. Then we'll be getting the JSON data, and we'll be storing this data first inside our local database, and then we'll be showing this to the user. So we'll make it async, and here we need to provide the URL. Let's copy this URL. Now create a variable. It will be response. Now we need to wait and send a get request. For that, first let us import HTTP. HTTP is inside http.dart, and we need to call it as HTTP. Then use http.get. It will send a get request. But before that, we need to specify URI dot parse and then specify the URL. In this way, we will be sending a GET request to the endpoint, and then we'll be checking if our response has a status code of 200, means it's giving a value of success. In that case, we'll be storing the data response. That in that case, we'll be getting the data inside our response.body. So let's parse that. But before that, we need to decode it. So response was inside response.body. Now response is inside our data variable. Now, if we look this API carefully, we don't need the full JSON result that we get like this. Instead, we only need some parts like the hits, and inside hits, there contains list of 20 items. So we'll be only needing this hits and nothing else. So for that, inside data, we'll be needing the hits, and then it contains a list. And for each list, we are going to save the data inside our database. So what we are going to do for that, to loop over the items, we'll be using a for loop. Just use dt in data, specify the return type, it will be a var. But we don't need to loop inside data, but we need to loop inside data that has hits. It means that we'll be looping over. It means that we'll be getting inside data hits, and we'll be looping over all the list. So here, create a new variable. It will be a single news. And here we'll call the hackernews.fromJSON factory function that we have created that will convert JSON to object model. Our JSON was inside this a single news, and this contains the full list. So each news is getting a type of hacker news model, and then now we have got the news. We need to simply save it inside our database. Database dot, here we need to insert news because it will insert news inside database, and it's expecting us to provide hacker news, and hacker news was inside news. So here we don't need to provide await because insert news will take some time to complete it. Now it is all done. This will save the news. Now it is all done. We don't need to do anything else. So if we have any, we can make it as a Boolean function. Like if response is 200, in that case, in this case, will be returning as true. Else, if something error happens, will be returning as true, and also making it inside try catch, so that if something error happens, that gets handled. So if something error happens, then we'll be sending as false. And we might also get some response status code other than 200. In that case, we'll be also returning as false because our fetching data was not successful. And also print that error in fetching API. Provide the status code inside response. dot status code. Now the function to fetch the API and save it to the database have been created. Now we need to simply call this function. Now let's build a UI part now, and we need to also check whether this code is working or not. So visit home.dart. Here, let us build an app bar. App bar will have a title of text, hacker news. Now it's okay. Let's make the title in center. So use center title and make it to true. It will center the title. For now, let us focus on showing the data to our UI. First, we'll be creating a variable that will be a list of hacker news. Let's make it as latest news. Assign it to empty list for now. Also create a boolean variable as loading to know whether the data is loading or not. For default, let's set it to false. For now, for default, let's set it to true. For the first time, if we open it, then it will be loading. The logic that we are going to use first will be reading our local database. So if our local database doesn't have any data, in that case, we'll be fetching the API. And if we have any data, then we'll be reading it from the database. So for that, we need to add one more function. Let's add it here. Count the number of news inside database. Depending upon the count, we'll be able to know whether we need to fetch new news or show the news from the database. So it will be static. Future, it will be a type of integer, and it may also return null if it doesn't have anything. So let's make it as get news count. Make it async. Declare db. It will be our await create database. And here we need to return Sqflite dot first integer value. What it does, it is a helper function that it gets the integer value of count star. So here we can use await db dot run query. Here it will be the query like this. Just copy it. But the name of our database was news. And we need to not select, we need to give the count. Now if we call this function, we'll get the count of the number of news that are there inside our database. Open our UI page here. So this will be the first page of our news, and we need to also focus on pagination and timely fetch, but that will do later on. But for now, just create a function, read news from db or fetch API. First page news, make it async. First we need to get the count. Await local database dot get news count. It might provide null, so we need to handle that. Just change it to 0 if it's null. Okay, we'll be getting the count. So if our count is 0, then we'll fetch the API. Just let us print fetching the API. And just create a variable data, or we don't need to make it is API fetched, and it will be, we need to await and fetch our hacker news API dot get latest news. So if our fetching is done, then we can proceed to our next step, reading data from our local database. So let's write the function read data from local database. Making the function name as get news, make it async, and create a new variable news, await local database dot get news. You will be getting 20 news according to our limit that we have set. Then we need to change the state, latest news that we have created, set it news, and we need to map it. So for each news we are going to, the data is not in form of hacker news, so first we need to convert the data to JSON hacker news model and then convert it to list. So for that we are mapping it. And then we need to convert the data to list. We are using map function because it will loop over all the news that the Sqflite provide, and from that we'll convert it to hacker news model and then convert it to list. Now loading is now done. This loading will be is false. So if our API fetching is done, we'll call get news, and else if count is greater than 0, then we don't need to fetch the API. We can simply call get news. And also print data from local database. Now in this way, if we call this function inside our init state, then after we open the app, first it will run this function and it will check the count. If the count is 0, then it will fetch the API, otherwise it will read the database, it will read the local database. I know this function doesn't look good because we need to do more modifications in it, but for testing, let us first, inside our main.dart file, let's make it as async and use widget flutter binding dot ensure initialized. It will initialize all the widget first, and inside our main.dart function we need to create our database after we launch our app. So here we need to call the create database function first time because we need to open our database. So it will be local database dot create database. It will open the database for us inside our main.dart file, and now also change it to the news demo app Now it's okay. Now inside our home page, let's build a UI. Inside our body, we need to check if it's loading. Then we'll show a circular progress indicator. Else we'll show the data, and data is in form of list. So we'll show list view builder. Here we'll first let us provide the item count. The item count will be latest news length, and inside item builder we need to provide the context and the index. Now here we'll be having a simple UI. For that we'll use list style. The title will be text of latest news index dot titles, and subtitle will be text latest news index dot author, or we can make it little fancy by so now it's okay. It might happen that our list doesn't have any data. In that case, it's showing a circular progress indicator. So to handle that case, here we can check if all news if latest news is empty, then in that case we can return text no. In that case, the no news found. Just wrap it as center. Okay. Now let us restart our application. Or I think that we need to stop the app. And now we need to run it from start. Now let's check our debug console carefully. So it's showing circular progress indicator because we are not calling this first page result. So inside our init state, we need to call first page news. Now let us restart our application. Now it's saying fetching data from API, and it's also showing us the data. So that's great. So now it's working. We can also add the trailing as an icon button, and the icon will be icons dot open in new. Here we need to provide an onPress function. For opening it in another browser, let us import our URL launcher. We need this package. just use flutter pub add URL launcher, and it will add a dependency. Here, let us write a function like this. We need to import launch URL, and here we need to provide string underscore URL. We need to specify URI.parse, and it will launch the URL. So let's link it here. So on press will launch the URL, and our URL was inside latest news dot slash index dot URL. Now if we check it, it's showing like this. Also, let us add a leading as text index +1. So now it's showing number of news. We are getting 20 number of news. This logic is not so good. Now, if we go to this logic, then you will find that we are first getting the count of number of news that we have inside our local database. And if it's 0, then we are fetching the API, else we are reading it from database. So this is really not a good logic, because if our database is full, then we are not fetching the API anymore. So this cannot be a good case, because data will be changed in future and we need to fetch new data and add to the database. So for this, we need to do some modification here. We fetch the new news and save that to our local database and then show that to the user. So to know that when we are fetching the API, we need to store the timing when we are saving the data inside our local database. So for that, let's do it. Let's create a new table, visit local database file. Now, here first we will be writing a function that delete the whole local database. We need to do that if we are storing the local data for a long time, then it will also increase the size of the app and it will be a gap between the new data and old data. So if you want, you can delete the database, and if you don't want, don't use. But in this case, I am also showing you how to delete the database, because I'll be deleting it. If I am fetching new data, I will be deleting the old data. It will be static. It will be delete all news from local database. Let's make it a static future. Delete all news. We need to timely delete old news. Otherwise, there will be a conflict between the latest news and old news, and some news will be inside the gap and user will not be able to see the latest news. Let's use db is equal to await create database and return await db dot delete. We need to specify the name of the table. It was news. So if we call this, it will delete whole table. and we need, and that's all. Now let's also give a track that when we are fetching the API. For that reason, we'll create another table. It will be a table of time or timetable that you can. So let us create another table here. When we call this create database function, it will create db.execute. We need to write standard SQL now here. It will be create table. Let's give the name as saved time. First, we need to have a row of, let's add a page number to know that which time we are fetching the data. We are adding this key as page number, as the if you fetch the API, will get data in chunks of 20. So we are considering one page to have a data of 20. So for that, we are making this key as page number. We'll give it as integer. It will be a primary key. So that we can uniquely identify it. And it will have one more row. It will be last saved time, and it will be a type of date time. That's all. We don't need to do anything. We need to write the function here. Here we are creating the table, and it will have two rows. First will be our page number, and second will be our last saved time, that when we are saving the data inside our database after fetching it from API. Now insert, here we are going to insert time after saving the database, after saving to the database. Again, like our previous one, make a static future function. It will be insert save time, make it async. And here, since we don't need to provide the time, but we need to provide the page number. So for that, let's accept page number, because it will be uniquely identified. And then we need to call var db is equal to await create database, and here return await db.insert. Here we need to specify the name of the table was saved. Name of the table was save time. And the values will be in form of map. First one will be our page number. Let's copy it directly from here so that we don't have any mismatch. Page number will be the page number that we're accepting, and second will be last save time. Will be, if we are inserting, we are calling this function, then in that case we'll only be using date time dot now. Now we are having our last save time as well as the. Now if I call this function and specify the page number, then it will tell that when this page number was fetched and data was retrieved. So there also might be some conflict if we are updating, so always use conflict algorithm. to replace. Now get the saved time of each page. It's like previous one, use static future function. Here we'll be providing list of map string comma dynamic value get save time. We don't need to provide the page number here because we are, let's show all the page number at once. Var eb is equal to await create database and just use data await db.query. The name of the table was save time. Let me just print the data, otherwise I will not be able to know what data is being printed, and then return the data. We need to also delete the table sometime or after a very long time. Let's also add this, delete the save time table static future delete save time return await db dot delete name of the table save time. Make sure that the table name and rows are correct. If not, then you might get some problem. Now we have write the logic. Now first let us add one button here that will delete the database inside our scaffold. Let's make it a floating action button. Icon will be, or child will be icons dot delete. Now if we click this, it should delete our whole database. For that, what we'll be doing, we'll be using local database dot delete all news. Now let us try to click it. Oh, we also need to change the state, set state, and here we need to change the latest news to an empty list. So now if we click it, so it says no news found, and if we don't have any news, it's telling fetching from API and it's fetching all the new news. Now if I restart the app, you will find that caching is making our app fast and it's taking very less time to load from database. Now let's not only fetch the data from API, also give it a track like local database dot insert save time, and if we are calling this function, it means that we are only fetching it for page number 1. Directly I am specifying it as 1. Now why I'm specifying this page number as 1, because the first page that we are here, it will be our page number 1, and if we go after 20, then it should be our page number 2, means more news will come. Or let's just make this page as page number 0. It will be more better. So here, after we are completing or inserting all our news, then we'll save it as page 0. This is our first page, so it will be page 0. So now let us just delete all the news and restart our application. You'll find it's fetching and it's saying some errors like invalid argument, so it's not able to save our date time. Let's do something. Let's change the type here. Instead, let's make this last save time, let's change it to datetime.now.to string. I think it will solve the issue. Now let's check it. Let's add a refresh button here so that we can refresh the page directly instead of restarting our application. Let's just add one more floating action button. Just add that with a row. Add some padding. Make the alignment main axis alignment to main axis alignment dot end. And one more floating action button. It will be our refresh button. Just provide some gap between these two buttons. Add a sized box of width 10. So now we have our two buttons. We can just call the first news function, and if we use this, it will refresh the page automatically if our data is 0. Now here we are reading the data from our database. Let's just delete the data and refresh it, and it's saying that no such table exists. I think we should stop the app and rerun the application again. So now our data is coming from local database. So if we call this first page news function, first we need to set is loading to true, set state. Now let us just delete this and refresh it. Here we are getting no such table exist. So it's just not creating the save time table. Let's just do one thing. Delete the application and run the application. Build the application from start. So it's fetching the API. And if it's running correctly, then it's also saving the data inside our database. Now it's working. Let's try to delete and do a hard refresh. So now it's fetching the API. It means that if we encounter with this kind of error, like creating a new table and it's not working, then you can uninstall previous app and install the latest one. It will solve the error. Now let us, in our fetch first news, let us also call the list of time, or we can do one thing, just initialize it outside list of map string comma dynamic saved time. It will be an empty list. Create another function, get the last time page was get all the times when pages were saved to database. It will store all the list that when it's saving the data to the database. So now let's call get last saved time, make it async. It will be var time is equal to await local database dot get save time, and we'll be setting our state save time to the time that we are receiving here. Now let us also print the time, or we are printing it. If we call this function, it will print the time. Let us just restart our application and also call this get last save time inside our init state. Now the last time we have saved, it's storing the date time, and it is storing the page number and the last time that we are saving, and data is coming from database. Now what we need to do, if we refresh, means till now if we refresh, it should add new news, and new news should be shown to the user. So if we refresh now, you will see that we are getting the same data from the database. Now in this case, first we will check when was our last time did we fetch the data. So we'll add the logic here, date time first page saved time. So when was our first page saved into our database, we'll be getting that time. So it will be inside date time dot parse, because it's in form of string. We need to convert that string to date time, and it was inside last or save time, and index was 0, and it was last save time. The time was inside last save time. It might happen that we are not it might happen for the first time it's happening, so we'll not be having any time. In that case, let's just provide a random date and time. Now this will provide when we fetch our first page. We can also print this first page time to verify it. Let's restart it. Now it's showing us this time. It means that it's able to parse the time correctly. Now we need to check the difference. Now what I want, this is in this API refresh very frequently. So what I want to fetch the data, if the last saved time is greater than 5 minutes, then it will fetch the data automatically and save that data to the database. So let's do that. Let's first calculate the difference, or we need to add the current time. will be date time dot now. The difference will be in duration difference current time dot difference first page save time, and it will give us the difference that how much time we have not fetched the API of for the first page. So if now we need to modify this count logic, so if our difference is greater than or equal to 5 minutes, or our count is 0, difference dot in minutes, or our count is equal to 0, in that case we'll be fetching the API. Now the time is 7:02 and the time we have fetched the API was 5:53. So now we don't need to delete our database. If we press the refresh button, it will show us the new news automatically and save the data. So let's check it whether it's working or not. And let us also print the count here, that how many count we have for the news. Currently, let us just restart the app. Currently we need let's restart our app to get the count of number of news we have. So the number of news we have inside our database is 30, and it's automatically saving the data. You can see that it was 20. Now the last time we are fetching the data, it's 7 to 45 seconds. Now let's just decrease the time for now to test. Let's just make it as if difference is more than 2, greater than 2, then it will fetch the data. So just refresh it. You'll find that data is coming from local database. And if we change the difference to 1 and just wait for 1 minute, the last time we have fetched the news was in 7:05. Now 4 minutes have passed. Let's also check if new news are coming from API or not. So new news are coming. Let's just refresh the application and check if new data are coming. It's saying fetching the API, and you can see that new data are being added, like the data. It's something related to beer. So this was the first. Since we are ordering the data by time, so for that reason we are getting this data at position number 6 and this data is coming at position number 0. So that's not a problem. But now if we check the count that we have, it's 33. New 3 news are getting added, but it's only showing 20 news. So what we can do, let's add a scroll controller. Like if we scroll, we have already written the function that to show more news. We have already written the function to show more news, but we have not written the function to fetch more news for API. Like there is also a pagination for the API. Like this first, this will give the news of the first page limit of 20. Now we need to go to our second page to get more news for our second page. So for that, there is also some pagination that is happening. If you check here for pages, we need to provide the page number. So simply just use and page is equal to, let's add it as the first page I'm expecting is 1. Now the first page is 0. The second page is 1. So similar to our previous one, we will just modify this. Here we'll ask for the page number, which number it wants, and here add the modify the request to the page number that we want. Case page number will be the page number, and when we are saving the data, it should be depending upon the page number. Now it will give some error. Now we need to provide the values like the modification that we have done here. When we are calling our API, we need to provide the page number. So when we are in the first page, we can give like int page current page. Let's make it as 0. And if we move to another page, then we'll increase the count. So here we'll provide current page. And depending upon the page, it will show the result. Now it's obviously more than 1 minute since we have fetched the last one. Now let's try to restart. Currently we used to have 33 number of news and we are getting new news. Let's just refresh it again. It's reading the news from local database and the number of news is getting added, but it's only showing 20 news. So this is able to fetch new news, but it's not showing more than 20 news. In that case, what we will do, we will write another function. It will get more news from local database. More news. Make it async. So here first, we need to get the save time, get more news, and it will be giving us news. So it will be var news is equal to await local database dot get more news, and here we need to specify the last number of news that we have. Currently it's only showing 20 news, so the list is containing 20 number of news for that reason. So just provide latest news dot length. The starting point of our news from database will be after 20 and it will show next 40 news, and currently we have 39 number of news, so it will only show next 19 news as we have written the function. So we'll set the state like this one. Latest news will be news.map, similar to this one, and is loading. We don't need to load the full screen because we are going to be adding a scroll controller. Instead, we can add a circular progress indicator here. So for that, let's create another Boolean function is more news loading. Just set this as false. For first, it will not load more news. If it is loading more news, we are just making the latest news. This logic that we are fetching and assigning all the news to the latest news will assign the next 19 news to the latest news, but it will not show the first page news. So we need to do something else. We need to use add all. It means that it will add all the previous news and then append it to the list. In this way we can use it. Now let's try to just refresh the page. Now we are getting new news. Let's just reduce the time to something around 5 minutes. We don't want to refresh immediately. Now if we refresh, we'll find that our total number of news that is inside database is 43, and the last time we have fetched is 20. When we scroll down, we need to load more news from local database. So in that case, just use a scroll controller, define it here. Scroll controller, it will be underscore scroll controller. Assign it as scroll controller. Now what we'll be doing, we'll be getting new news when we scroll to this end position. Here it will not do it automatically. We need to write some function to load more news on scroll. So it will be void scroll listener, make it async scroll listener, and we'll check if underscore scroll controller dot position dot pixels is equal to scroll controller dot position dot max scroll intent. It means that we are at the end of our page. In that case, we will increase the current page and call this function get more news. Now let's try to refresh it. Data is coming from API, and currently we might. Now let's go to 20. Now it's still not loading new news because we have not linked this scroll controller with our list view builder. So here inside our list view, just add a scroll controller. It will be our underscore scroll controller. Now here inside our init state, inside our scroll controller, we need to add listener. So we have already written the listener function. It was underscore listener. Now just refresh it. So now if we go down, let's just restart the application. Now it's fetching the data from API, and now almost I think if it will fetch some data. So data will be more than 49. Let's test. So if we go 20, you will see that more data is coming. And if we go here, so totally 53 datas are coming. So this is the way we add scroll listener. So now it's working. So if we open a link, it's also working since we have added URL launcher. But one thing that is not happening, currently we are only fetching the data for page number 1 or page number 0. It is okay, it's loading data from the database, but one thing that we are not doing here is that if we add some circular progress indicator, then it will be more better. So here we have created a here we are increasing the page number every time and then calling get more news. And here we also have is more news loading. We are changing it to so here if we change it, if we call this function, we should first change is more news loading to true, and then after it's done we can set is more news loading to false. and it will show the circular progress indicator here. So there is one more thing, that is bottom navigation bar. If it's more loading, then we can show a circular progress indicator. Think we need to circular progress indicator, else do nothing. So let's see. If you see that currently we have new news. Now if we refresh this page, and if its time is more than 5 minutes, then it will load new data here and then save to the database and then show it to the user. So if I refresh now, it's fetching the API. Let's just restart the app. And here we can see that the last time we have fetched the news is 4:42. So if we refresh, data will come from local database. It's coming from local database. But we need to check every time we call the refresh. So we need to call, if we are refreshing it, then we need to also check the last save time here when we are refreshing it. So it's fetching from API again. Now let's test it. Now it's loading from database. If we try to refresh again, it's again loading from database. Now we are saving the latest news. That's okay, that if our data is not there, but we are only fetching the data of page 0. Suppose if we want to get the data of page 2 or page 3, then in that case, we need to call the API multiple times. Here, since like here, as we are calling this first page news, we need to create another. It will be next page news. It will fetch because this news will be very old, means from the first time that we are using. Here we need to write another function. So first, if we run out of news from local database, in that case, here we will also check next page news. We'll almost use the same logic, like first get the time, get the count, get the time, and get the difference. But first we need to know that in which page we are there. Here we are getting the count, and we are also getting the save time, but it will not be first save time, it will be the page number that we are currently in save time. Current page save time. Now it will just tell that the current page we are there, it has been saved or not. Currently we are only fetching the data of page 0. We can also fetch the data of page 1, 2. In this case, we'll be also adding the count of which page we are fetching when we are fetching which page. So now here, first get the length, save time length, means how many times are there in save. Currently we only have for page number 0. So instead we are getting, currently if we refresh, it's showing us that we have saved for page number 1 and page number 6. I think that we are not resetting the page number. For that reason, we are getting this. So if we do refresh, then we should also change the current page to 0. So now let's just first remove this page number 6. For that, we need to delete our time, save time. Now if we press this, it will delete all the data, including the save time. And now let's refresh it. So we are getting a null check value because it's empty, but we are still trying to load. So we need to handle this. For that, we can do one thing. We can check the length first here. Int saved time length. It will be the length of save time dot length. So if length is greater than 1, only run this. Otherwise, save time dot length is greater than should be a length of 1 at least, greater than or equal to 1. Then run this query. Otherwise, just use save time of 22,000. Now let's save it and let's try to restart it. Now this will solve the error. If we delete everything and load it again, you will see that it's loading the data. But if we go down now, it's not fetching the next data, because now if we go down, you will find that our data only has 20 number of data and more datas are not getting low. But this should not be the case. To fix this, we need to call the basic. See that we are saving the page number 0 at this time, and after that your next page news will get the count. Just remove this code. Let's just copy this code only. Now first, if I say length, so here what will be, here the logic will be a little bit different. If our current page is greater than save time length minus 1, it means that current page might be greater and save time length is smaller. It means that we have already fetched from the database and we will use the data from the database time that we have saved. Make it as next page. Here we need to provide the current page. Now we need to calculate the difference. If difference is greater than 5 minutes, and here we don't need to use the count logic, then we need to fetch the API and just specify which page number we are fetching. Now what we want for now, if our data doesn't exist inside our database for second page, then we'll fetch the next page from the API and then save it to the database, and after that to show it to the user. So here we are calling get news, but it will not be get news, it will be get more news that we have created. Here will be also get more news. If we are fetching the data, then we'll first save the data to the database and then we'll get more data. Otherwise, we'll get the data from next page data from local database. So this one. Now we need to call this function. Currently we are not calling it anywhere. So just call this. We are calling this get more news here. Instead of get more news, we'll call this next page news function. So what it will do, if we have not fetched the news for that current page number for more than 5 minutes, then it will fetch the data from API, then save it to the database, and then show the news to the user. So currently, if you see, if we now restart our application, just restart. The last save time that we have saved was 7:57. So it's loading data from API. Now, if we have not saved, it's saying that, so the logic will be like this. If current page is greater than save time, then we'll use date time of 2000, else we'll use this one, date time dot parse. Last save time depending upon the current page. Now let's try to restart the app. So now if we are deleting, we don't have any news. Let's also clear the console. Now if we refresh it, we are getting the data from API. Currently, we don't have any API. Now it's fetching the data and now it's loading. Now you see that we are fetching the data for page number 2. It's loading. So it's not showing the circular progress indicator. Let's just show the circular progress indicator so that we are able to know that data is being loaded from API or not. So instead of changing more loading to true here, we can set the state here. So the set state, we need to set the state here because it's not working like that. Now set the more loading to true. Now let's just delete it. Now we'll be able to see the loading indicator. Let's try to refresh. Now it's saving the data to the database and then it's displaying us. Now if we go down, it's showing a very bad loading indicator. Let's just modify it. Let's wrap it with a container of height 55. And make it in center. And also give it as a size box. Now if we go down, let's just restart the app. Let's check. It's showing a circular progress indicator. It's showing us for a very minimum amount of time. So instead of here, let's do one thing. Let's not call it here. Let's call it here from the time we are fetching next page. Now I think it will show a more better circular progress indicator. Now it's showing better indicator. Now we are able to understand that it's loading for, it's taking time because it's loading the data from API. Now, so this way we have built the application. Now if we don't have any data, it will load from the database. And if we don't have, it will fetch the API, then save it in the database, and then we will get a chance to load.